This is a test, October 22, 1990. This is an interview conducted by Roland Matthies with James Wilkerson of Springfield, and we want to talk with him about his experiences in the business world of this city as it began a number of years ago and as it got into growth and into much problems concerning the merger and integration of many industries. Jim, we're delighted to have you with us on this record that we make as a permanent part of our historical records in Clark County. Let me ask you the first question. You were beginning in Springfield about what year in your industrial life?
I joined the Steel Products Engineering Company in June of 1942.
1942, the year before I got here. And you came into what was known as Steel Products Engineering Company.
That is right.
Who was the head man then?
Well, the history of the company goes back to about 1908 in Dayton, where J.E. McAdams founded Gem City Machine Company, which made tools, dies, and fixtures. In 1914, he had a fire in his building in Dayton and decided to move to Springfield. He purchased a 3-story building at Dakota and West Columbia Street. The building was built about 1885 and was used to manufacture tricycles and boys' wagons. In 1904, a Springfield gas engine moved from Washington Street, and 10 years later, McAdams bought that building. Practically the whole building was destroyed by fire in 1984 after SPEC had moved out.
As I understood, Mr. McAdams was a native of this area or not?
I think he was a native of Dayton, Ohio. His residence was in New Carlisle. He had a large farm outside of New Carlisle and lived, and also in the late 70s died at that place at a ripe old age of about 90.
He had a son-in-law, didn't he, whose name escapes me? Who was that?
Yeah, his son-in-law was Big Bill Jordan.
Oh, yes.
And he operated the company under McAdams for many years before he moved on. He was the head of the company when I came there, and he left shortly after, about 1947 or 48, to go to Curtis Wright, and he later went to the West Coast with Boeing, but he was the general manager at the time I came.
He was in charge then during World War II.
That is correct. He was there during the war, and we had great growth, of course, at that time. I can go back a little further and give you a little history about steel products, if you like that.
Sure would.
The company, as I say, came to Springfield in 1914, and Lawrence Rausenberger joined the company in 1915 as chief aeronautical engineer, and he developed a 12-cylinder V8 engine for aircraft. This was the first power plant that was successful after the Liberty engine, which was used in World War I. As a result of the work at Steel Products and Rausenberger's expertise, they were awarded a contract in 1918 to rebuild the old Liberty aircraft engines from McCook Field, which is now Wright Field. And that work went on until the mid-20s and really got the company started in the contract manufacturing business. It's interesting that a later engine that Rausenberger designed and built was the first one to fly over the Andes Mountains. And that particular museum is in the Air Force Museum in Dayton. Rausenberger knew the Wright brothers and was quite well known in the business, and Mr. McAdams always gave him a lot of credit for the early successes of steel products.
Now you said he was the inventor?
He was the inventor and developer of not the Liberty engine, but the engine that followed. And he worked there, and I knew him quite well, fine gentleman. He retired in 1950 at about 80 years old.
Was this a liquid-cooled engine?
No, this was air-cooled, but later on, and that's an interesting question, he developed the first water-cooled engine. It developed 175 horsepower and was highly successful in the Army's early aircraft. And it was a smaller engine and fighter planes, but it was a very good development. And we built quite a few, but we never went into production on these engines. We developed them and tested them, and then they were either built by another contractor or the government. So we did not have any production lines for aircraft engines other than the Liberty engine.
Now you started there right out of college?
Yeah. I graduated from Wittenberg in June, early June of '42, and as I recall it, about the next day went to work at Steel Products.
And what did you do first of all?
My first job was in the production department as what was known in those days as a stock chaser.
Gopher, huh?
And we followed parts through the plant and tried to push them along and keep track of them. And of course, in those days, there weren't any sophisticated systems, and most of it was done by these stock fellows in the production department that just kind of kept notes.
Yeah.
And when we went out looking for parts, we couldn't always find them, but later on, of course, the systems were developed and the computer came in, but that was sometime later.
Now at that time, was this company concentrating entirely on airplane engines?
Well, it's interesting. At that time, we were basically in tool and die work, and the aircraft engine back in those days. But about 1932, we were making gearboxes for a stoker company called Combustion Air.
Oh, yes.
And they were the second largest stoker builders behind Iron Fireman in the country. And they went bankrupt. And Mr. McAdams had a large inventory of gearboxes that had been delivered and also were in process. And rather than to settle for something like 10 cents on the dollar, he took the company over and moved it into part of our buildings, and we built stokers for about, I guess, up to the late 40s. And we also developed a gas burner and an oil burner to go along with the heating line. So at one time, SPEC was, or Steel Products as it was known then, was in the heating business, had a large distributorship around the country, had district representatives and their own sales department, and it was quite a business for, I'd say, 15 years almost.
What do you suppose was the greatest number of employees you had in your experience there?
Well, at the end of the Second World War, we had reached our maximum employment, and it was just slightly less than 2,000. 1,900 and something.
And what was your particular job about then? Do you remember that?
Well, at the end of the war, I was materials director and was in charge of the production department and the purchasing department. And A little later on, after Mr. Jordan left, a man by the name of Chilton Gano became works manager or operating manager, and I became his assistant.
Mm-hmm.
That was in the early 50s.
Let's reflect back a little bit about the time you started with steel products. What were some of the other competing businesses of a tool and die sort in Springfield?
Well, we really, in our line of work, didn't have any local competition, but we did buy equipment from several of the companies. I remember buying quite a few lathes from the old Springfield machine tool, which was owned by the Montanus family.
Mm-hmm.
And also we had a lot of surface grinders that were built at Thompson Grinder. At that time was owned by the Baldenhoffers.
Oh, they're both gone.
Yeah, they're
both businesses are gone.
Yeah, some time ago. Yeah.
Had they been acquired by merger and then dissolved?
Yes, the machine tool company of Montanus's was required by, I think it was LeBlanc Lathe. I'm not sure of that, but one of the bigger lathe companies in Cincinnati.
Mm-hmm.
And Thompson Grinder was sold to a company, a big machine tool company, I can't recall, in Connecticut. So both of them were early to go in the, I would say, in probably the early 60s.
You remember the old gentleman, Mr. Baldenhoffer, the
Yeah,
father?
I knew him, and
Spoke German so fluently?
old German, yeah. And the two boys, he had two sons.
Yeah.
And he wasn't around much after I came. But of course the two boys ran the business. Very successful, Thompson Grinder.
I know Dr. Stoughton, as president of Wittenberg, always had the ambition that he was going to get some money from Mr. Baldenhofer because they both spoke German.
Yeah.
He didn't get to first base.
Well, he was quite successful, and that company grew from the time. See, they were only 2 blocks beyond where we were, the Thompson Grinder, and so we knew the Baldenhoffers, and as I say, used a lot of their equipment, and they were very fine people. I had a lot of respect for both those boys.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Were there any other family businesses that you can recall of a similar nature?
Well, there were quite a few subcontractors that did job work for us during the war. The patent manufacturing, which was a family business.
That's Clark Patton?
Clark and Charles Patton. Clark Patton Sr. and then the 2 young men in it about my age was Clark and Charles. Clark Jr. and Charles. And now I understand that their sons are running the business. So that's still in business. Let's see, there was Payne Tool, owned by Mr. Payne.
Yeah.
He was located close to us. And, well, I don't know, there were several others that we worked with that did subcontracting for us.
And they're practically all gone.
Most of them are gone, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, they are.
Where did Steel Products go then with its product line after World War II?
Well, after the World War II, during World War II, our 2 main products were propellers for engines, for aircraft engines. We built a gear controlled that controlled the pitch of the prop, and we made those for Curtiss-Wright in big quantities, very different. The other was we built the top gun turret for the B-17 bomber, and that was a big contract. At the end of the war, when I spoke of having almost 2,000, we were building 400 of those turrets a month.
Wow.
And there's an interesting story about it. When we started with Sperry Rand, who had done a few turrets, and this is before we actually got into the war. And when we built the first ones and put them on the B-17s, and they went into service, when the German fighters would come in, and the gunner is a manual operated turret. When the gunners would get on a plane, they'd keep following it, and many times they'd shoot off the tip of the wing or the tail of the plane,
Yeah.
which was a serious problem. So Wright Field came to us, and we developed a very clever small mechanism we put in the turret, which was called the fire cutoff. And as it was made with cams, and it came to the tip of a wing or the tail or any surface of our own plane, it would shut the gun off until it cleared again. And that saved a lot of airplanes.
I would say.
Yeah. And you can understand a young gunner when he's on that plane coming around there.
He got excited.
He got excited, and he just didn't stop firing in time.
Yeah.
And
I've never heard that story.
Yeah, that's a very interesting story. And we received several awards for that development from the Air Force.
What kind of metal went into that sort of work? Where did you buy it?
Well, the cams were made of a powdered metal, and they were molded, and they had to be and then they were machined very carefully, and they had to be very precise because you didn't want to stop too soon before you got to surface, and you wanted to stop firing the minute you cleared the surface. So it was quite a development. And we had at that time and before then, and certainly since then, very, very fine engineering department. Great designers and could come up with just about any mechanical designers, mechanical engineers. Fantastic people, really.
Did you do the grinding of the propellers, or did you buy them already finished?
No, the propellers we didn't make. Curtis Wright assembled those. We made the hubs where the propeller,
gears.
and then we made the inside, which was made of gears. That was a pitch, they call pitch control, change the pitch of the propeller depending on what power the pilot wanted. So, but then you ask about after the war, and we, between, I guess, the end of the war and the start of the Korean conflict, we got into quite a few things, and probably the most interesting, we built the gun turrets for the B-36, the later bomber, as a follow-on to the work we've done. But probably the most interesting thing at that time we did, and we did a lot of different things, but was the development of the helicopter transmission. In 1946, three of the aircraft pioneers, Frank Piasecki, Igor Sikorsky, and Larry Bell, were all starting to develop the helicopter. And one of the very difficult parts of the development was to take the speed of the engine, the RPM of the engine, which was approximately 4,000 RPM, and reduce it to a transmission to 300, which is the rotor speed of the helicopter. And this is a very challenging job, and we developed this transmission. And then when the Korean War came, of course, we went into production for the Bell 47, which was a little bubble ship, the 3-passenger. You see it on MASH yet.
Yeah.
And that was the one that was a workhorse of the Korean War for all kinds of transportation of wounded. It was a workhorse, really, of the whole Korean setup. And we reached a production of 60 of those transmissions a month, which was quite a feat because this is early 1950.
40 years ago.
Yeah, and of course the helicopter industry grew, and I think we were very foresighted to to see that coming and to get in right at the very development. Frank Piasecki later sold to Boeing Bertol, which is a big helicopter company. And of course, Sikorsky developed his business and then sold to United Aircraft. And Bell has their own.
Bell is still in business?
Oh yeah, they're all still in business.
Are they?
Yeah. Yeah, very successful.
What's the largest helicopter that you serviced?
Well, we made a transmission for Sikorsky back in the early 60s for what they called the flying crane. And this was the largest helicopter ever built. And it was used to transport heavy equipment. And the military bought several, and they could transport big guns, all kinds of underneath.
Could they pick up a tank?
Oh yeah.
Is that right?
Tank.
My.
Big helicopter.
My, what power that took.
But yeah. And so we did build that transmission, which was the largest we ever built. It never built very many of them, as I recall it. But it was an interesting development. The biggest single transmission we built was during the Vietnam conflict, where they used the Bell Huey for gunships and all kinds of things. It was about a 8 to 10 passenger, and it was again the workhorse at Vietnam. And we finally reached a production of 400 a month, which was quite a thing.
Was your number of personnel about the maximum?
Well, at that time, we had moved all our operations to the Baker Road plant. We started the Baker Road plant in 1956, and that was a year after Kelsey Hayes bought the company. And by the end of '60s, we had moved everything out of there and sold the old plant.
Now, when Kelsey Hayes bought in, did that mean that was McAdams out?
Now, McAdams, as I recall it, was in his late 70s, and he felt that he should get his estate in order. And he was looking for a buyer that he felt would fit in with our people. And he had several different offers, and he finally decided that the Kelsey Hayes people were good people and would treat his people right.
Where were they based?
Huh?
Where was Kelsey Hayes based?
Detroit.
Detroit.
And they were a major manufacturer to the big three of both wheels and brakes. At the time, and I guess still today, they make about half of the passenger car wheels in the country.
Wow.
And a large brake manufacturer too. So at that time, in the middle 50s, they had a program to diversify, to get into other than automotive. And they bought several aerospace companies, and in 1966, I think it was, they formed what was known as the Aerospace Group. And that included a company in Utica, a couple of companies in Michigan, and a big company in Philadelphia.
Speaking of Mr. McAdams, I had the pleasure of visiting in Arizona Mr. and Mrs. McAdams at their lovely home there.
Yeah.
Dr. Stout and I went out to see them, naturally hoping for some money for Wittenberg. Not much developed, but they were very wonderful hosts.
Oh yeah, wonderful people.
I understand you went into the hog business in New Carlisle.
No, I don't. He may have started it. He had horses, show horses, and cattle. I think that goes back to after McAdams retired. Palmer Meredith had a big farm in South Charleston, and he really went into the hog business in a big way. But as I recall it, I think McAdams tinkered around a little bit, but it was Palmer that...
Now there's another name we ought to get on the record. When did Palmer come into the business?
Well, Palmer came in the business about I would say 1940. And
Did he come from out of town?
yeah, he had been a sugar broker in New York. And
Well, that's a switch.
he was, yeah, and he was a good friend, and I'm not sure exactly how, but of Jordan's. The Jordans and Meredith were good friends.
So he followed Jordan.
So, no, there was an interim in there where, well, I guess basically he would be the first executive after Jordan. And I guess maybe it was 41. The war was coming on, and Mr. Meredith knew that there would be no sugar business. And I think he was hired, and his original job was sales manager or vice president, I guess, of the heating division. And then, of course, during the war, the heating division closed down, and he became, I guess he became first vice president of finance, and then when Kelsey bought the company, McAdams retired, and he became chief executive.
Now, what was your position at that time?
Well, at that time, I was general sales manager at that time.
So you were on the road a good deal.
Yeah, I did a lot of traveling and spent a lot of time with the various customers at that time. But, then in 1963, I think it was, Palmer had a stroke and died very suddenly, and I was made general manager.
And you had a man working with you who had a big Wittenberg history, Bob Keck.
Oh yeah, Bob.
He was in finance?
Yeah, Bob came about the same time I did, 1942.
Right out of school.
Well, Bob had a job. He graduated a couple years ahead of me. I forget what he'd been doing, but he came in I guess early 42. He'd been there 3 months before I came. And we were friends from Wittenberg, but we became very good friends. And Bob was in the production department, and then later on in the sales. And then he was made. He went into the accounting department and eventually became vice president of finance. So he wasn't really in the sales. He was more of his career was in finance.
Control, that sort of thing.
Controller, yeah. He was controller.
Now, after the company moved out of the old building, which is now a wreck, to the Baker Road place, did the product line change much?
Well, the main change probably was we went into, at that time, into radar antenna. Now, we still made helicopter transmissions, but as a result of our long experience with, say, gun turrets and all kinds of revolving equipment, we engineered what was known as antenna. And these were used for various things, and we built a lot of different antennas. I got some notes on that. I can tell you a little bit about it. We made over 1,000 for the old Western Electric M33 anti-aircraft director. And as a result of that experience, which was in the middle 50s, 56, 57, along in there, and that's really why that was big equipment. Those were sizable pieces of equipment, and that's why we built the Baker Road, really, to get a lot more room. And then from that, we made antenna mounts for the Nike missile the Air Force Titan missile, the Navy Terrier missile, the Army's Hawk missile, and Bell's automatic landing system for aircraft carriers. So we had quite a long period of time in making this antenna mounts.
When I think of an antenna, of course, I think of a little rod sticking out of the automobile. Yeah. This is something different.
Well, yeah, the antenna mount was a big base, probably about, well, depend on which one we're talking about, but they would be probably 10 feet at the base and have a lot of different controls, gear controls in them. And then the antenna was made of either a dish of some kind of plastic with electronics in it, and sometimes it was made from magnesium. And these dishes were really, with electronics, really what tracked the missile or whatever it was. And it was a big business. The first ones we made, the old M33s, and later the Nike anti-aircraft missile system were trailer mounted. And that's one of our first relationships with Fruhoff, which later acquired Kelsey Hayes. And they made the trailers, very special trailer. And then this mount went on the trailer so it could be moved from various locations.
This was in the 50s?
Yeah, this started probably 56, and we made mounts up until, the middle of the 70s. See, some of that later, like the Titan and the Terrier and the Hawk, are still being used around the world. Those were later on.
You were a subcontractor then to what?
Well, we made the Hawk we made for Raytheon. The Terrier was the Sperry Rand. And the Nike was Western Electric Bell Laboratories. So there were various contractors that, and of course, Bell Aero Systems, we made the landing system for them, for aircraft carriers.
Now, when did you become the head of SPECO?
Well, when Palmer died, it was November of '63. November '63.
Did you get out of sales then, really?
Yeah. From then I...
mostly operations then?
I was in operations, right.
When did you begin to feel the pull of Fruhoff?
Well, sometime after that. That was a rather sudden thing. Kelsey, from 1955 until '73, really ran SPECO and the other aerospace groups, and we really, what happened in '73 or late '72, the people from Chicago, and I'll have to recall their name, the brothers that owned the hotels and so forth.
Hilton's?
No, the other chain.
Sheraton?
Yeah, and what were their names? Big entrepreneurs, and very well. Well, anyway, they had an interest, or got an interest in Kelsey Hayes. And they had not only these hotels and other businesses, but they had machine shops and that type of business. So they proposed a merger to, at that time, Mr. Kennedy, who was head of Kelsey Hayes. And he didn't want to be taken over, and they tried to make a friendly acquisition. And so after he refused several times, they threatened to make a tender offer. And knowing that they had the wherewithal to do that and would probably put the stock price up considerably and tender it, he sought to seek out a more, what he considered, friendly and better fit. And he'd known the Fruhoff family went way back in Detroit, and so did the Kelsey people. And they'd known each other, and we'd had relations with them down here in the trailer. So in a very, very short time, in a period of maybe 3 weeks, the merger was made.
My goodness.
And because they had to move fast because the Chicago company was threatening the tender offer, and it worked out well. It was a good fit, and Fruhoff needed to diversify, and Fruhoff was a highly successful company at that time, and they were the largest trailer manufacturer, and 1 in every 4 trailer on the road yet today is a Fruhoff. But they all came to a sad ending.
Now, did Kelsey Hayes as such disappear then? As a name?
No. They kept the name because
As a
it was
subsidiary,
well known, and they were just called a wholly owned subsidiary of Fruhoff.
Of which SPECO was a part.
Yeah, that's right.
Now, when did you make the switch then to Detroit?
Well, I went to Detroit in the summer of 1966. And, no, 1976. I didn't go up there till after Fruhoff owned it, and owned the company, or had the merger. And I was there till I retired in 1984. So I was there about almost 9 years.
And what were your main responsibilities up there?
Well, the company was operated, the Kelsey Hayes subsidiary was operated as a completely independent. And so I was the chief executive officer of Kelsey, and we would only see the Fruhoff people about once a month. We'd have a monthly management meeting, and then we'd have a staff meeting every Monday morning, and I would go to the Fruhoff staff meeting. But it was operated entirely separate. They didn't understand our business, and we didn't understand theirs very well, and it worked out well. They treated us extremely well, extremely well. We very seldom turned down on anything we asked for in the way of equipment or anything else. Very good.
But you were in Detroit long enough to see Fruhoff go down the drain.
Oh yeah. Now that happened after I had retired, but I was still on the Fruhoff board. See, when I came up in '76 to head up Kelsey, they put me on the Fruhoff board, and I was on that till the end. And basically, what happened in 1985, I think it was, the Fruhoff was attacked by one of these Wall Street raiders, a fellow named Edelman. And they didn't want to be acquired by him, and so the management at that time, and I was out of the management by then, and Merrill Lynch got together and formed a leveraged buyout. And it was really several bad things happened, but it was really just too much debt, bank debt. They couldn't service the debt, and they began to sell off assets to reduce the debt. And the aerospace group, including SPECO, was sold to a Chicago company called Graybill. And Graybill borrowed a lot of money to buy
the old story.
And as a result, they went to bankruptcy. So I'm afraid, it's hard to say, but I'm afraid that SPECO, after 80 very successful years, is about through.
Is that so?
Yeah. It's a sad thing.
Certainly, as their employment is way down, isn't it?
Oh yeah, and getting worse all the time. The banks, which really taken over both Graybill and the aerospace group, have tried to sell the companies and have had 2 or 3 pretty good prospects, but one of the problems with SPECO is mainly a military type of supplier. and does very little commercial work. And with the present situation with the Russians and the debt, no doubt the big cut's going to be in defense.
Mm-hmm.
And as a result, most people are afraid to buy in, and so the only other thing they can do if they can't get enough cash flow is to liquidate,
Mm-hmm.
which is, as I say, very sad. It's had a very wonderful and long history of success.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of things they've done through the years. During between World War I and World War II, they made a lot of special equipment designed, and several of them were rather interesting. They made the machine for, I got a couple notes on that. Let me look here. Well, incidentally, are we going too long?
We're getting just about.
Okay.
We got about 5 minutes.
Well, I did want to tell you about a couple of these special machines that were built during that period from 1935 to 1940. We made the first machine that would successfully put toothpaste in a flexible tube.
Is that right?
And that was quite an engineering feat.
How far back was that?
That was probably 1932, 33, along in there. And that was done, I think, for Bristol Myers, as I recall the history. I wasn't there yet. We then built a machine for making the bite-sized biscuits, shredded wheat biscuits.
Yeah.
And that was made for National Biscuit. And we also built a very large baking oven, automated it, for National Bakery to bake bread continuous. So we did a lot of interesting things.
I should say.
Yeah. And so I enjoyed every minute I was with the company, and we had great people.
That's good to hear.
We really did.
Well, Jim, we're coming to the end of our tape. I want to express my appreciation to you for this interview time and for helping to get on the record of our Clark County Historical Society some interesting data about one of the principal industries of Springfield for many years. And to say my appreciation to you for what you've done in behalf of Springfield, Ohio. You've been a top-notch citizen. You've done your work well. You've kept your skirts clean. You've been a real citizen. And I want to say thanks.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
I want to get that on the record.
Well, thank you.
Thanks much.
Okay. My pleasure.
This is a test. This is an interview by Roland Matthies of David Dillahunt, who is the Vice President of Advest Incorporated with offices in Springfield. And I'm interviewing him on behalf of the Clark County Historical Society in order to bring to the permanent record of our society the background and history of the brokerage business in Clark County. Dave, it's all yours.
Thank you, Roland. My introduction to the business goes back to August of 1960, when I started with a firm called Green and Ladd. Green and Ladd was headquartered in Dayton, Ohio, with, as I recall, 7 offices throughout the state at that time. It later grew to about 12 offices, and then during the paper crunch of about 1964-65, shrunk back again to about 5 offices. Prior to being Green and Ladd, the name of the firm was Green and Brock, and that goes back to the 1920s, when the the firm first started. When I started with the firm, we were located in the lobby of the Shawnee Hotel.
I remember it well.
And with me there was a fellow named Urban Miller,
Yeah.
who died, I would guess, about 5 years ago. The gentleman who was manager of the office was named Elmer Kelly, Kelly. Elmer was a former president of the Rotary Club. And Elmer died, I think, probably in about 1965. He retired in 1962 and moved to Florida, and that's the last I heard of him, although I did see his wife or widow sometime later, and I think Elmer died around 1965. There was also a technician there called John Westcott. Johnny Westcott came to Green and Ladd in about 1952 or 53 from New York. His family was here back in the early 1900s when they built the Westcott automobile.
I can remember that automobile very well.
They lived in that Frank Lloyd Wright house
Yeah.
out on East High Street and about Greenlawn or whatever there's Greenlawn, right around that corner right around there. And that was the Westcott family home.
Now, you called him a technician. What does that mean in your business?
Technician's a guy who reads charts. He is the kind of person who doesn't really care what the name of the company is, how much they earn, how much dividends they pay, what their historic track record has been as far as earnings or dividends is concerned. He merely looks at the supply and demand as depicted in a chart. And there are still many, many technicians around today. A lot of that now has been computerized. But John, back in those days, had charts all over his walls from floor to ceiling. And would post his charts every day and would buy stocks and sell stocks on a very short-term basis based on what he saw were support lines or resistance lines or certain formations that you look for in charts. You look for such things as you call double reversals or W formations or N formations, all types of gimmicks that you look for in trying to predict what a stock price is going to do in a short term. Now, one of his buddies was a guy named Ralston Thompson, who of course you knew.
Oh, yes.
And matter of fact, right over there on the shelf, I have a book that Ralston gave to me and autographs for me by Joe Granville. And Joe Granville is still around. He's the kind of crazy guy who plays the piano in front of groups and predicts what the stock market's going to do, and has been wrong so many times that he's almost a joke in the industry now. But he was one of the early technicians, and Tommy and Johnny Westcott were devotees of Mr. Granville.
What training did you have before you came into the business?
My background, as far as discipline college is concerned, I have a degree in economics from Ohio State. I went from there to a trust company in New York, which was then in Detroit, which was the National Bank of Detroit. And I worked for 2 years for National Bank of Detroit in their trust department, doing several different jobs.
Doing what my son does.
Yeah, chasing down dividends and going to annual meetings. And I remember one annual meeting I went to a company that was headquartered near Detroit, and for the life of me I can't even think of the name of it now. I don't think it's in business anymore. But I was just a young 22-year-old and wandered into the meeting and told the moderator before the meeting started I wanted to cast my votes by voice in person. And he kind of smiled and said, "All right, young man, go on in," which I did. And then the meeting proceeded, and finally they started calling for votes, and I started asking some questions that I was directed to ask. They were written out for me because I wasn't smart enough to ask the right questions. But anyway, I started asking the questions, and finally the chairman said, "Well, young man, just how many shares do you represent?" In a very, very condescending way. And I said, "Well, about 3.5 million." with which the chairman kind of swallowed and stepped back a minute and said, "Well, maybe we owe you a little better explanation than what we've been giving you." So, first exposure to for 2 annual meetings. But I was casting the shares, of course, of the institution I represented, and they didn't know that at the time when I walked in.
Were you a native of Springfield?
Born and raised in Springfield, went through all the grade school, junior high school, and high school here under Charlie Fox at Springfield South High School. graduated in 1952, and then went on to Ohio State University and graduated in 1957 from Ohio State.
How'd you get to Detroit?
Job interview at Ohio State, and
Oh.
I was looking for something in the banking trust type business, and National Bank of Detroit interviewed there, so I took the job up there, and somewhere between 1957 and 1959, reality set in, as opposed to what you conceive to be reality when you're a college graduate. And I decided I really didn't want to do that type of work, that I really wanted to go out and do more people type things. And I had known Elmer Kelly before I left for college. I think that was about the year he was president of the Rotary Club, and I went to a Rotary meeting and that sort of thing as his guest. So when I decided I didn't really want to do the trust business, I contacted Elmer, and he said, yes, come on down and we'll talk about it. So he got me an interview in Dayton, and Green and Ladd hired me and sent me over here to work in 1960. They had an opening here because a fellow named Bob Massey, who was still here in town. Bob Massey started out with Green and Ladd, I would guess around 1956 or 1957, subsequently went to Merrill Lynch. And he just retired from Merrill Lynch just a couple of years ago, but Bob still lives here in town with his wife.
Now, when you started out with Green and Ladd, that was the only brokerage house in Springfield?
No, there was a firm, actually there were two firms. The Ohio Company was here, and still is today. The Ohio Company was a one-man shop, and a fellow named Carmody, C-A-R-M-O-D-Y,
I remember him.
was here. And I don't
Yeah.
recall his first name offhand, but
E.J. Carmody.
E.J. Carmody, that's correct.
Yeah.
That's right, I remember. And he died a few years later during the winter trying to get up his driveway. Apparently he lived on a hill or something. I remember the circumstances, and he couldn't get his car up the hill, and he parked it and trudged through the snow and had a heart attack. He was an elderly gentleman, but was around for years and years and years. And McDonald and Company had an office here, and Clytus Marvin, who is still here in town, who's since retired from Ohio Company, or from McDonald. That's a firm out of Cleveland. And Clytus maintained an office in the First National Bank building, but I think he was over here about 2 days a week, or maybe 1 day a week, or by appointment. He really worked out of Dayton.
But Green and Ladd were really based in Dayton as the headquarters.
Green and Ladd was the headquarters. A fellow named Jack Green and Harry Green and Preston Crable from Springfield were the three principals of the firm at that time. And a fellow named Delbert Ladd, who was the floor trader on the New York Stock Exchange. Preston Crable went to New York to work on the floor with Delbert Ladd. And then Preston moved back here to town. That's Charlie Crable, who is a local attorney here. I think it's Charlie's uncle. It's Preston Crable. He was quite a golfer, played golf for Ohio State University when he was an undergraduate. And Preston died, but I don't remember how long ago. I kind of lost track of him, but he was Charlie Crable's uncle, I'm fairly sure.
How did you conduct your buying and selling when you started out?
Everything was done by telephone. We had a huge blackboard that covered one wall there in the office there in Shawnee Hotel building. And we would hire girls to mark the board. They would take the ticker tape off the ticker tape machine. We had about 50 stocks posted on that board, and they would, with chalk, mark that board throughout the day. So if someone called and wanted to know the price of General Motors or General Electric or a stock that was well known or well traded around here, we would have that on the board, and we could look up and see what the last trade was and tell them what it was. If not, then we had to, we could go out on the ticker tape and look through the ticker tape until we found the last trade, which might be a time-consuming thing because maybe the stock didn't trade more than a half a dozen times during the day. Failing that, we would have to teletype, an old perforated tape teletype system, and we would teletype to the Florida New York Stock Exchange, and they would teletype back to us what the price of it was. Then we'd call the client, tell him what the price of it was. He'd put an order. By that time, the price had changed. You're back to square one. But that's the way it was done. And in about 19 '65, we got the first quote machines in, where you could select what stock you wanted to price on, press that button in, and the tape would feed out telling you what the last bid and offer was on that stock. Then they started to embellish that. You could get volume, what the last sale was, what the current bid and offer was, those types of things, what the Dow Jones average was doing. They would even put on the baseball scores during the World Series on that thing. And we had also what we called a broad tape, and there's still a broad tape system around now. It's electronic now. It used to be an old printing machine. The broad tape would print out news during the day, what the stock market was doing, what was going on as far as the Korean War or anything that happened to be going on at that time. I can remember the day John F. Kennedy was shot. It came over the broad tape, and trading got so hectic that you didn't know where any stock was traded. The tape ran about 2 hours behind actual trades. They were backed up that far, so any report you got was 2 hours old. And Urban Miller and I got ourselves a fifth of whiskey and sat at the desk there for until about midnight, till all the returns came in to see everything. And I can remember Urban and I sitting there just having a drink and watching the ticker tape until about midnight when it finally ran off. And the market was down about 50 points, which was a significant move back when you consider that the Dow was only about 600 at that time. So if a 50-point drop was a significant move. And then the following day, when people realized that commerce was going on the same as always, whether John F. Kennedy was alive or not, buses were still going up down the street, people were still going to restaurants, doing whatever people do, and the market was up 50 points then the next day.
That tape thing that we used to see in the movies, it was up on a pedestal and the big shot was pulling it out and reading it. Was that the broad tape?
Yeah, no, that was a ticker tape.
That was a ticker tape.
That gave you nothing but just typed across there what the price of the last transaction was in a particular stock. That would be typed right on the New York Stock Exchange as it occurred, and then be flashed out through ticker tape systems throughout the world. The broad tape was a Dow Jones news service, which we can now draw up on our computers, but back in those days it printed continuously just different news items that might occur that would affect.
How was that transmitted? By wire?
Yes. It was all teletype type of transmission, and we had a gal sitting at the teletype all day long, sending messages, sending our buy and sell orders to the Florida Exchange, receiving reports back that the stock was purchased and for which account and that sort of thing. Of course, all of our ledger books then were posted by hand. We had secretaries that would post all the ledger books on who owned what, and our record, a hard copy record, was kept, of course, in our Dayton office too. And monthly statements would be typed up by teletype and sent out to clients. It's a wonder, you just wonder how you survived. But at that time, a 5 million share day was supposed to be the break-even point for the brokerage industry.
What is it now?
150 million, 200 million, something like that. But back then, if you did 5 million shares in one day, that was supposed to be the break-even point at which brokerage firms in general made money. Anything less than that was bad for the industry. Anything better than it was good for the industry. And then we got to the place where in about 1967, they cut the hours of and I'm not sure about these dates, I have to go back and look them up, but right around that period of time, they cut the hours of the exchange. The market, when I first started, opened at 9 in the morning and traded until 3 in the afternoon. They started closing the exchange for 1 hour during the noon hour. Then they started trading from 10 o'clock until 2:30 because there was so much activity. When it got up around 10, 12 million shares a day, the system couldn't handle it. A lot of brokerage firms got into trouble, and then Green and Ladd decided, as a part of that, Green and Ladd then closed their doors in Springfield in 1970.
Been that long ago, man.
They closed all their branch offices, remained open in Dayton. They then merged with a company called Cowan and Company, are now known today as Green and Cowan. Green and Ladd Cowen, C-O-W-E-N. And Jack Green is still there. I saw him in the airport about, maybe a month ago. Jack's about 85 years old, but still active in the business. His brother Harry, the other Green in the family that owned the firm, died a number of years ago.
And when they closed the Springfield office, what happened to you?
I then looked around. I wanted to stay in the business. I wanted to stay in Springfield. I did not want to move to Dayton with the other folks. So an old fraternity brother of mine, a guy named Pete Halliday, was a principal in a company called Verco and Company in Columbus. A fellow named Joe Verco, Joe and John Verco owned the company. Pete Halliday was their executive vice president. Pete Halliday was president of the Beta House, Beta Theta Pi House at Denison. Here I was president of the Beta House at Ohio State. So we met each other at a convention and got to know each other. And I knew he was in the business, and we talked occasionally on the phone about business and that sort of thing. So when I found out that Green and Ladd was moving out of Springfield, I contacted Pete. We got together and set up an office here. So we started with myself and Urban Miller in 1970. Urban Miller became ill and died around 1978, and I hired a fellow named Bill Allen in 1980. And Bill was here with me for about 8 years, and Bill died in 1988. So now I have two other people with me now, a fellow named Don Shively and a lady named Janet Stroud. So there are three of us again. So.
You were speaking about the volume switching from 5 million to 150 million. What explains this? Inflation?
I would guess inflation has a great deal to do with it. A proliferation of pension plans, profit-sharing plans, insurance companies getting into the business, banks getting into the business. I suspect back in 1960, when I first started, you had very little of that, very little in the way of huge trust funds that were buying and selling tremendous amounts of stock. You had in Springfield, Ohio, a cadre of 800 or 900 people who bought stock. Now there are just tens of thousands of people in Springfield who own stock either directly or indirectly through mutual funds or through individual stock ownership. People at Navistar getting stock distributions. Kroll Collier, when it closed, they got stock distribution. A lot of those types of things happened during that 20-year period, and worldwide markets, a phenomenon of the last 5 or 6 years. Japanese buyers, German buyers, all players now. Back in those days, they were not. So the whole industry grew tremendously during the 80s. Just tremendous explosion in growth, and the ability to handle that many trades now is pretty easy. It was inconceivable back in 1965, 66, 67 when the crunch was coming and we were doing 10 to 15 million shares a day and couldn't keep up. But everything was handled by hand. Everything was hand canceled and hand endorsed, and the wave of the future is going to be probably no stock certificates at all because they're so cumbersome. You'll probably have all
book entries.
Yeah, I suspect so. It's already that way in treasuries. As of about 2 years ago, you can no longer buy treasuries and get a certificate. They're now all as treasury bonds, treasury notes, treasury bills. Most Ginnie Mae, Government National Mortgage Association bonds are that way. Great many of the tax-free municipal bonds are now that way. It's gradually creeping in, and it will, I suspect, will not be too long before stock certificates will be the same way.
As I sit here in your office, I look at two computer faces. What do they do?
There are two separate events with these computers. The one on my left is what we call a Quotron system, which is a system where I can draw information that I need on what stocks are selling for. I can bring up my account base, what accounts, what they're holding, what stocks they own. I can bring up news events. So it's a replacement of the old ticker tape system, because I can draw any stock I want to draw up. I can find out what the Dow Jones Industrial Average is doing. I can find out any of the market averages, what they're doing. So that part of that computer replaces the old ticker tape. The other part of the computer replaces the broad tape, the news retrieval system. So I can get news retrieval, I can get Reuters news retrieval system, or I can get Dow Jones News Service on this computer on my left. It also allows me to pick up name, address, what my customer base is, what stocks they own, that sort of thing. If a news break happens on General Motors, I can punch in my machine and see who owns General Motors, and the machine will tell me what people own it, and I can call them and let them know what's going on. The other computer is my personal computer, and it's one that I can control the input. I input into it what my customer might have bought General Motors for, what he sold it for, how long he held it, whether he has a gain or loss. It's also an organizer for me. I can put on messages that tell me when a particular stock might get to $50. I want to know about it. A bell will go off and tell me that stock is 50, and I can call it up then and let somebody know who might be watching the stock or looking for it that it's now trading at 50.
That's
I can
fantastic.
I can put messages on there that I have someone who has a CD coming due. Let's say November the 31st or November the 30th. It will tell me when to call that person and tell them how much is coming due. It will even dial the phone for me.
Without your asking it?
Yes, without my asking. I just put on, all I do is put on, I'll tell the computer, give me a picture of everything I need to know today. Take me through this week. And it'll roll through there, and I can stop it whenever I want to get the information I want. So it gives me a better control over my day. Instead of making notes and a card file, all that sort of thing, it's done automatically for me. It also writes letters for me. Thank you letters, welcome letters, happy birthday letters, or any letter that I want to input. And all I do is push a button and tell the computer what person I want that to go letter to go to, or what group of people do I want it to go to, and it prints it out and mails it for me.
Getting back to the historical precept of this business, how do you see the business evolving in Clark County through the early days of your experience? Was it a matter of the national investment picture developing, or did you see something in Clark County that was particularly good for your business?
I think it was a matter of the national market evolving. I don't think Clark County has anything peculiar about it that would make it grow more here than somewhere else. Obviously, the more middle and upper management people you have in a community, the better it is for the climate as far as my business is concerned. If you have one big plant with a half a dozen higher paid individuals and 1,000 people who are not so well paid, that's a different set of potential investors than if you have 100 companies of 2 or 3 executives and maybe 5 low-paid employees. So a lot of it depends on the type of mix there is in a community, what kind of investment potential there is. I don't see Springfield as a desirable target for new brokerage firms coming in because there aren't that many affluent people in Springfield. Take someplace like Columbus, big difference. A lot of small companies domiciled in Columbus, a lot of business headquartered there. Columbus is next only to Hartford in a number of insurance companies domiciled in one city.
Is that so?
So it's a different economic climate than there is in Springfield.
We've certainly seen the family-owned business almost disappear in this county.
Yes. And the family-owned business is a key, one of the keys to a good investment climate, because these people are the ones who are concerned about saving, investing, providing for their future, that sort of thing. They're not waiting for a pension plan or a Social Security to take care of them when they get a retirement age. So if you have a lot of family-owned businesses, that's a good investment climate. Springfield had that for a long time. As you pointed out, it's been going downhill.
But just a few years ago, as I recall, commercial banks started getting into the brokerage business, and then I think the brokers retaliated by getting into the banking business.
Yeah.
Where does that stand today?
Everybody's in everybody's business. Yeah, insurance companies, banks.
Do insurance
brokerage.
companies do brokerage?
Yes. Everybody does brokerage.
Is that right?
It's just the lines now are so blurred that they're almost non-existent. Our company, for example, has a bank. We own our own bank, Kodak Best Bank.
Which has federal insurance.
Yes, FDIC insurance.
Yeah.
So it's we're all just competing for the same dollars now.
Mm-hmm.
So it's vastly different from what it used to be. One of our big customers used to be banks and trust companies, because they couldn't do the brokerage business. They would call us and we would do the brokerage business out of fee. But now they can do it themselves. So that source of customer no longer exists.
As you look back on your start with Green and Ladd, how do you think you developed your own clientele? Was there a lot of person to person, or were you given good leads?
I took the long way around. My business was not the way it's constituted today, where you get on the phone, you make 100 phone calls a day and get turned down 99 times, and you get one client and you've had a successful day, and so you start the next day making another 100 phone calls and calling people you don't know, and the hard sell type of thing. That's the way it's done today. When I started, that is not the way it's done. You gain some credibility first. I became president of the JCs, became involved in everything I could possibly get involved in the community, so as to get my name and face around, so that then when I called someone, I at least had some kind of identity, and they knew who I was, and they knew I was going to be here for a while, and that sort of thing. And then that's a long, hard way to do it, but I think for me it was an appropriate way to do it. And then after about 5 or 6 years in the business, then you start getting referrals, you start getting family members, your name gets out a little more. I wrote a lot of articles. I was on the radio 3 times a day giving stock price quotations, on television a few times over in Dayton doing interviews. So all of that sort of thing was not only fun and something I was interested in doing, but it also provided me the exposure that I felt I needed to have some credibility.
You also acquired something of a reputation as a master of ceremonies.
Yeah, somewhere along the line, rightly or wrongly, but that's something that I really enjoy doing. It's fun to do.
Sure it is.
I always got a big kick out of it, and you met a lot of interesting people that way, and a lot of politicians and that sort of thing was people that were fun to know. And I still enjoy doing it. It's a time-consuming thing if you're going to do it right, but I just get a kick out of it.
You've got to be prepared.
You've got to be prepared.
You sure do.
Yeah, absolutely.
As I look back on the offices in the Shawnee Hotel, I can remember Carmody, and I can remember one of your customers, now called clients, Stanley Pettigrew.
Stanley Pettigrew.
He spent hours and hours every day, didn't he?
Every day. There was a cadre of about 6 or 7. Stan Pettigrew was one, and one that's still here. Eldon Houck was a gentleman that, and still comes in here every day. Judge Glenn Dentley still comes in here every day.
He's in the hospital.
He's in the hospital now, I understand. But
let's name some more.
Let's see. A guy named Fowler Hupman. Fowler Hupman, H-U-P-M-A-N, was a farmer out by South Charleston, and he came in every day for years and years. He died a few years ago. Emery Gableman, E-M-O-R-Y, Emery Gableman was another fellow who hung around this office up until about a year ago. He died about a year ago. The fellow never took his hat off. I never saw him without his hat on, and but I understand he was very bald and very vain about it, wouldn't take his hat off. But as far as I know, he slept in the thing, because I never, ever, eating lunch or whatever, lunch counter, never took his hat off. There was a fellow that used to come in from Dayton, His last name was Norton. For the life of me, I can't think of his first name now, but Urban Miller and Joe Sterling, who recently died.
Joe just died.
Joe was quite a joker, but anyway, this fellow would come in and he had a Homburg hat. He just bought it. He was really proud of it, and he put it on the hat rack. And so Joe and Urban decided they would, and this is an expensive hat. They went out and bought the very, very same hat. If the guy wore, let's say, a size 7, they bought a 7 1/4 and a 6 3/4 size hat, same style. So the guy comes in, puts his hat on the rack. Joe Sterling goes over, takes that hat off, and puts a 7 1/4 on there. So the guy leaves in the afternoon, puts a 7 1/4 on, and it's down over his ears. Next day he comes in, they put his own hat back. He's okay. The third day he comes in, they put his 6 7/8 on. So now the hat's sitting on top of the guy's head. This went on for, I bet a month.
It sounds like
And
Frank Dog.
Yeah, these guys, I can't remember who the guy's name is. And these guys were just breaking up every day. And this guy was going to a doctor. He thought his head was shrinking or something. But he finally caught on when he saw Joe come out of Urban's office and put the hat up there. He finally caught on to what was going on.
Oh,
But this went on for about a month. But it was a room full of cigar smoke and cigarette smoke and all day long. But it was pretty much the same group of people, and Stan was one of them. And, there were others. Give it some time, I could probably think of
His
them.
wife eventually joined him, Mary
Yeah,
Pettigrew.
yeah.
She spent a lot of time there.
Mary's still around.
Yeah. You mentioned Bob Massey as being a local broker, and yet he works out of Dayton, doesn't he?
Yes, he commuted to Dayton at Merrill Lynch every day for 25 years, I suppose.
They never brought an office in here.
Never did. There has always been several people who, and Pat Kane lives here in Springfield, works for Merrill Lynch. And there's a McDonald guy here in town too, besides Clyde Marvin. Rastetter lives out on North Fountain. But Merrill Lynch has always had somebody living here in town who works out of their Dayton office. I think Pat Kane is the only one.
So how many individual brokers would you say, just counting them up quickly, are working in this county?
About 10 or so that I know of.
That's quite a few, isn't it?
Yeah, quite a few. They're just Ohio Company and us, Advest, are the only two with full-time staff offices. But Payne Weber, Prue Bache, McDonald, Merrill Lynch all have people who work this area, but they work out of Dayton offices.
Now, if an insurance company goes into the brokerage business, will it let a regular insurance agent cultivate brokerage business?
Yes, it is possible they will. Most insurance companies don't promote that because it's a different mindset. It's just like they've been trying to get brokers to sell insurance for years, and we somehow just never get around to doing it. And the same thing is true, I think, with insurance-trained people selling stocks and bonds.
Mm-hmm.
It's a different type of product altogether, and kind of difficult to mix the two. We do some insurance types of products now and have for the last 5 years, but it's mostly single premium 1-year CD annuities or 5-year types of things. Very few of us do any what we'd call life insurance products where you pay a premium every month. I don't know if anybody might, although we're licensed to do it, just don't do it. It'd be difficult for an insurance agent to do it without all the backup material he needs. The brokerage industry doesn't want another statement for their clients to get a monthly statement on their stock portfolio and that sort of thing, so they're not geared up to do it. Mm-hmm. But it would be just a matter of getting the license, taking the test, and getting the license to do it. And they could do it.
What instruments were the particular investment objectives of most people when you started out?
They're the same as they are today.
Is that so?
Very, very much the same. There are several things that people are concerned about. First of all, they are concerned that their children will not live as well as they did. There's a concern that it will be more difficult for future generations to save money than it was for them. There's a concern that there's no way that they're going to be able to afford a college education for their children. And there's a concern that they never, ever have enough capital. I don't care if the guy has $5 million back in 1960. He still didn't feel like he had enough capital. And that feeling persists today. No matter how well a person is situated as far as capital is concerned, he's afraid that some kind of catastrophe, health-wise or economically, might wipe that out. So the concerns are pretty much the same. The first concern is, how do I take care of myself if I can no longer work? The second concern is, will I have enough money after I retire? Third concern, can I educate my children? Fourth concern primarily revolves around, can I leave something to my children? That's usually the lesser of the concerns, but that hasn't changed. People still are concerned about the same things now that they were 30 years ago.
Are they more speculative today than they were?
Runs hot and cold. I'd say there's no difference. In times like we're experiencing today, in October of 1990, no one wants to speculate. Had you been here 3 or 4 years ago, I probably wouldn't have that comment to make. I'd say a lot of people like to speculate. That's one way you can tell the market is too high. If you get a lot of people who think it's easy to make money in the stock market, and they're getting all these tips from the barber shop and wherever they get tips. Now the buzzword is safety. Don't do anything to rock the boat. I don't want anything speculative. I want to make sure everything is guaranteed, insured, that sort of thing, which leads me to believe we're probably close to a low in the market, because that's what happens. That's the mentality when things are at a buy point. That's when everybody is scared.
Certainly is not indicated in Congress.
No, that's a whole different zoo there. That's just incredible what's going on there, and we never seem to learn from our mistakes as far as Congress is concerned, and it makes you wonder whether or not the system's going to work.
Right.
When I don't think our founding fathers meant for that to be a full-time job where you spend the rest of your life. I suspect it was meant to be something where you volunteered or did some service for your country, your community, and then you came back home and worked. But that certainly is not the way it's working. Once you get there, you're there for life, and you do whatever you have to do to stay there. And there's something wrong with that.
Well, Dave, we've reached just about the end of our tape. Have you anything that you'd like to add for the good of the cause?
Can't think of anything.
I pumped you pretty
just
hard.
From an historic standpoint, I can remember when Navistar, back when I first started in the business, was about $25 a share. Now it's $2.
Is that right?
It went up to about 50 during, I think, 1977, something like that, and split 2 for 1. Kroll Collier was $52 before it split 2 for 1. So those are some of the things that you can remember. I can remember the market breaking through 1,000. That was such a major breakthrough, and it stayed there for 10 years. It didn't really get off that 1,000 north and south a little bit for about 10 years, and then it.
What were those 10 years? Do you recall?
That was 1972 when it broke over 1,000. It didn't do much then until 1982, 10 years later. 10 years later, it was about 1,085. Then, of course, we went from there right up to where we are today. But it took 10 years of base building before the Dow did anything, and it stayed at that 1,000 for 10 years.
I recall that one of the principal benefactors of Wittenberg, Harold Thomas from Canton, Ohio, made such a fine series of common stock investments back. This would have been in the 1940s and 50s when the market was growing.
Right. Post-World War II boom in the market.
Yeah. Well, sir, I appreciate very much this interview.
It's been fun. It's nice for me to be able to bring some of those people's names back to mind. It's amusing remembering some of those folks who used to come in.
I want to say my appreciation for the record of the fine citizen that you are.
Thank you. You're very kind.
Yeah.